A doctor does not hide a body. A doctor preserves life, honors death, and follows the protocol. But right now, I am hiding a body. My hands, trained for delicate surgery, are faking a Code 7, the hospital's directive for the immediate, unrecorded disposal of unrecoverable remains. The air is cold, smelling of antiseptic and my own fear. With one click, I will erase this patient from the system. I will become a criminal, and I will do it to honor her last, terrifying wish. Do not let them scan my eyes when I die. I am Dr. Aris Thorne. For 20 years, my world has been the predictable, sterile halls of Avalon Grace Hospital. I believed in the rules. Then I met my patient, Alara. No last name, no history. Just a woman with a terminal illness and a single, strange possession. A small, locked wooden box that hummed with a faint, persistent vibration like a trapped bee. Tonight, as her life faded, she gripped my wrist. Her eyes held a primal fear. They used the retinal scan to erase everything, she whispered. The box, it's the only thing hiding me. You must make me disappear. What would you do if a dying woman's last wish was a secret that could destroy your life? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe, because what I did next shattered my world forever. The metallic click of the lock on the medical supplies cabinet echoed in the silent room. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. A Code 7. She had asked for a Code 7. It was not a medical procedure. It was a corporate-level erasure, a protocol designed for biohazardous waste or victims of catastrophic industrial accidents where corporate liability was at stake. It meant the body was bagged, tagged with a nondescript barcode, and sent for immediate, high-temperature cremation. No autopsy, no family viewing, no record of death entered into the public database. It was a black hole in the hospital's paperwork, and for a doctor to initiate one fraudulently was not just a firing offense. It was a felony, a fast track to losing your medical license and potentially facing prison time for fraud, desecration, and a dozen other charges I couldn't even bear to list in my own mind. I looked at Alara. The raw, undiluted terror in her eyes was a stark contrast to the pale, clinical light of the hospital room. This wasn't the generalized fear of death I had seen in countless patients. This was specific, targeted. It was the fear of a hunted animal that has finally heard the hounds baying at the door. My job is to follow procedure, Alara, I said, my voice softer than I intended, trying to inject a calm I did not feel. The scan is for identification. It helps us notify next of kin. There are rules. There is no kin, she interrupted, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. And the rules are their weapon. The scan isn't for identification, doctor. It's for verification. The moment my retinas are cross-referenced, it triggers the purge. They will come, and they will unwrite me. The word landed in the quiet room with the weight of a physical blow. Unwrite me. It was a nonsense phrase, the kind of thing you'd expect from a fever dream or a psychotic break. But the certainty in her voice was absolute. She believed it completely. Who, Alara? Who are they? I asked, pulling a chair closer to her bedside. The scent of her lavender-scented lotion mixed uneasily with the sterile hospital air. She shook her head weakly on the pillow, her gaze drifting toward the humming box on her bedside table. It was made of a dark, polished wood, about the size of a large book, with no visible seams or keyholes. The low hum it emitted was a constant, unsettling presence in the room. They are the hounds, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the box. And that is the only thing keeping the shadows from the door. It hides my scent. It muddles my trail. But when my heart stops, its light goes out. And then, they will come running. I followed her gaze, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I was a man of science. I dealt in MRIs, blood tests, and empirical data. This was delusion. It had to be. Yet, the precision of her fear was unnerving. She wasn't ranting about monsters under the bed. She was describing a systematic, almost bureaucratic process of eradication, triggered by a standard piece of hospital equipment. It was the specificity that got under my skin. The retinal scan. The Code 7. These were real, tangible things in my world, and she was weaving them into her nightmare. I stood up, intending to check her to re-anchor myself in the familiar rituals of my profession. As I turned toward the door, my eyes caught a movement in the hall. A man stood there, silhouetted against the bright lights of the nurse's station. He wasn't dressed in medical scrubs or a doctor's coat. He wore a stark, dark suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. He wasn't looking at a chart or a phone. He was perfectly still, his head tilted just slightly, as if observing our ward, as if observing her room. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, a cold, impersonal glance, before he turned and walked away, his footsteps making no sound on the linoleum floor. A shiver, completely unrelated to the room's temperature, traced a path down my spine. It was probably just a hospital administrator, a family member lost in the halls, anything explainable. But in that moment, framed by Alara's terrifying whispers and the eerie hum of her box, he looked like exactly what she had called him. A hound. And the hunt, it seemed, was already underway. The silence in the room after the suited man disappeared was heavier than before. The steady beep of Alara's heart monitor now felt like a countdown. I tried to dismiss the encounter, to logic it away. A corporate liaison. A security consultant. The hospital was a large place. But the timing was impeccable, a chilling punctuation to her prophecy. I turned back to Alara, my professional demeanor feeling like a thin veneer over a growing unease. Alara, I began, my voice carefully controlled. What you're asking for is impossible. It's not just a risk, it's an atom bomb. Code 7 is for situations where the body itself is considered an active contaminant. It bypasses every ethical and legal safeguard we have. There's no death certificate. It's as if the person never existed within our system. To fake that is to unravel the entire fabric of my oath. She listened, her eyes, clouded with pain and medication, still holding a sharp, unnerving lucidity. She didn't plead. She didn't get emotional. She simply stated a new fact, her voice barely a whisper, yet each word was precise. It is the only way to protect what I carry, she said. Her gaze flickered again to the wooden box. The contents are not for you. They are not for them. They are for what comes after. But if they get the scan, if they verify my identity, it will all have been for nothing. The information I carry will be lost forever. It is more important than my body. It is more important than your career. The information I carry. The phrase struck me. Was she a whistleblower? A spy? Had she stolen corporate secrets so devastating that a private, extra-legal entity was tasked with her complete erasure? It was a narrative that almost made sense in our modern world of data wars and industrial espionage. It was a more palatable explanation than her talk of being unwritten. It framed her fear in a context I could almost understand, even as the scale of it terrified me. What information? I asked, leaning closer. If you told me, if I knew what we were protecting, maybe I could. I could find another way. Go to the authorities. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. It was the most expression I had seen from her, and it was filled with a bottomless pity. There are no authorities, Aris. Only different branches of the same tree. You must trust me. When my heart stops, you have a window. Perhaps 10 minutes. Perhaps 15. You initiate Code 7. You list the cause as a theoretical, airborne prion contagion. The system will flag it. It will trigger automatic lockdown and the disposal protocol. It will be the greatest lie you have ever told. She was laying out the mechanics of my own professional ruin with the calm precision of a surgeon. And she was asking me to do it to protect what? A data drive? Microfilm. The hum of the box seemed to grow slightly louder, as if in agreement. My pager vibrated on my hip, a sharp, mundane intrusion. I glanced down. It was a routine message from the front desk. Yet, in that moment, it felt like a warning from the world of rules and order I was about to betray. I looked from the pager to Alara's gaunt, determined face, to the enigmatic box. I was standing at a precipice. On one side was my entire life's work, my identity, my sworn oath. On the other was the desperate, possibly delusional, last wish of a dying woman who spoke of shadows and hounds, and carrying a world-ending secret. I need to think, I said, the words feeling inadequate. I need to understand this better. I left her room, the hum of the box seeming to follow me into the hall. The Code 7 request wasn't just a risky favor. It was a key, and I had the terrifying feeling that if I turned it, I wouldn't just be unlocking her freedom from some corporate pursuer. I would be unlocking a door in my own world, and I had no idea what was on the other side. The weight of her words, what I carry, hung in the air, a question mark over everything I thought I knew about reality. The hospital cafeteria was a monument to fluorescent lighting and quiet exhaustion. I sat with a cold cup of coffee, the Formica table cool beneath my fingertips. Alara's words echoed in my mind, a chaotic script against the orderly backdrop of my life. Asterisk code 7. Unwritten. The hounds. Asterisk I pulled out my hospital-issued tablet, its sleek surface a gateway to the very system she was asking me to defraud. I navigated to the internal policy database. Code 7 wasn't listed in the standard protocols available to most staff. It required an elevated security clearance. My curiosity, now fully ignited by a mixture of professional concern and personal dread, overrode my caution. I used a backdoor access I'd acquired years ago during a system integration project, a privilege I had never abused until this moment. The file loaded. It was sparse, written in the dry, passive language of corporate liability. Protocol 7, Event-Level Biological Containment. It authorized the immediate and irreversible sanitization of a biological asset to prevent cascading systemic compromise. The language was cold, dehumanizing. Biological asset. Sanitization. It was a world away from the language of healing. It spoke of containment and disposal, not care. The final line sent a fresh chill through me. Upon initiation, all standard post-mortem processing, including identification verification via retinal scan, is suspended. She was right. Code 7 bypassed the scan. I cross-referenced the protocol, searching for any past instances. The logs were cryptic, but there were more than I expected. A dozen over the past 5 years, always tied to this Signet wing, a private, high-security wing of the hospital I'd always assumed was for wealthy clients or sensitive government cases. The causes were listed as classified or under broad, terrifying categories like theoretical prion event or exotic pathogen exposure. There were no patient names, only case numbers and a final disposition, asset neutralized. A deep unease settled in my gut. This wasn't just a theoretical protocol, it was a tool that was used, and its use left no trace. It was the perfect mechanism to make someone disappear. Dr. Thorne. The voice made me jump. I fumbled the tablet, nearly spilling my coffee. It was Dr. Evans, the chief of medicine. His expression was unreadable. Ari, he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I saw you were assigned to the Jane Doe in 304. The one with the unusual presentation. Alara. I corrected automatically, my heart hammering. Yes, it's a complex case. He nodded, sliding into the seat opposite me. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. It's a tragic situation. But these kinds of patients, they can be unstable. They create narratives. Conspiracies. It's a coping mechanism for a terminal diagnosis. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. My advice. Provide palliative care. Document everything. But do not get personally invested. She is a liability. The word was a perfect match for Alara's own. Liability. It was a corporate term, not a medical one. Was he warning me off as a concerned superior? Or was he delivering a message? I'm just trying to understand her situation, I said carefully. There is no situation to understand, Evans replied, his gaze hardening slightly. There is only a dying woman. Do your job, Aris. Follow the protocol. Nothing more. He stood up and left as quietly as he had arrived. The encounter felt less like advice and more like a threat. My earlier theory of corporate espionage solidified, but now it felt closer, more menacing. It wasn't some shadowy group. It was the system itself. The hospital. Back in my office, the unease festered. I ran a deeper, more reckless search on the system, using Alara's patient alias and the fragmented data from the Code 7 logs. After several dead ends, a single file fragment surfaced from a corrupted backup. It wasn't a medical chart. It was a single line of text, a classification tag that made the blood drain from my face. It was attached to her case number. The tag read, Subject Status, Anomaly. The words seemed to pulse on the screen. Anomaly. It wasn't a medical term. It wasn't a psychiatric diagnosis. It was a classification, a label for something that didn't belong, something that needed to be contained, studied, or sanitized. Alara wasn't just a woman with a secret. She was a flaw in the system, an error in the code of reality that the system was programmed to correct. And Dr. Evans had just ordered me to stop asking questions. The Code 7 wasn't just her last wish. It was starting to look like her only chance. Dr. Evans's warning was a cage. The word anomaly was a lock. I was trapped between my duty and a truth I could no longer ignore. I couldn't research this within the hospital's walls. The system was clearly compromised. Alara had mentioned the box hiding her scent. I needed to find someone who understood the hunt. I needed to find the man who knew about shadows. My destination was the Glimmer Market, a sprawling, chaotic bazaar that thrived in the city's underbelly, a place where you could buy anything from vintage circuit boards to genetically modified orchids, no questions asked. The air was a thick soup of scents, sizzling street food, ozone from faulty wiring, and the cloying sweetness of exotic perfumes. Neon signs flickered, casting pulsating light on the crowds, their faces masked by hoods and augmented reality glasses. It was the antithesis of my sterile, ordered world, a place where reality felt fluid and secrets were a currency. Alara, in a moment of lucidity, had given me a name and a description. "Find Silas," she'd whispered. "He smells of copper and sings the rain." It sounded like the rambling of a fever dream, but it was all I had. I found his stall tucked between a vendor selling bootleg neural interfaces and another hawking glowing fungi. It was a clutter of broken terminals, tangled wires, and components I couldn't identify. The man himself was hunched over a soldering iron, the sharp, metallic scent of copper oxide hanging around him like a cloud. He was older, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, and he was humming a soft, complex melody that did, indeed, sound like the patter of rain on glass. "Silas," I asked, my voice feeling too loud, too clean for this place. He didn't look up. "You're the doctor, the one from Avalon Grace." His voice was a dry rasp, like stones grinding together. "She's close, then." The humming has gotten quieter. A cold dread trickled down my spine. "How could you possibly know that?" Finally, he set down his tool and looked at me. His eyes were the color of old, tarnished silver, and they held no warmth. "The box has a frequency. I've been tracking its dampening field for years. Its power is failing. When it goes silent, the hounds will have their beacon." He gestured to a small, crude device on his workbench, a single diode glowing a faint, steady green. "I assume she's asked you for the final protocol." I was reeling. He knew about the box. He knew about the hounds. The delusion was real, and it had a physics I could no longer deny. She asked me to fake a code 7, to simulate her death so they can't find her. For the first time, Silas's impassive face cracked. It wasn't with fear, but with a look of profound, exasperated pity. He let out a short, harsh laugh. "You ignorant fool. You still think you're the one in control of the narrative. What are you talking about?" "The code 7 is the verification," he said, his voice low and intense, cutting through the market's din. "Think, doctor. You use your high-level access to initiate a protocol designed for catastrophic, system-level threats. What do you think that looks like on their end? It's a flare, a signal fire. It's you standing up and shouting to the entire network. The anomaly is here. The containment has been breached. Initiate final sanitization." The world tilted. The cafeteria floor, the hum of the box, Evans's warning. It all rearranged itself in my mind into a horrifying new pattern. She hadn't been asking me to hide her. She had been asking me to activate the very alarm that would summon her executioners. Her last wish was a suicide pact, and I was the one who was supposed to pull the trigger. "She's not asking you to save her," Silas said, his silver eyes boring into me. "She's asking you to help her die on her own terms, before they can take what she carries. The simulation is the trigger. You were never going to be hiding a body. You were going to be baiting a trap." The logic of it was a perfect, horrifying engine. Code 7 wasn't an escape route. It was the finish line. Silas's words echoed in my skull, a deafening roar that drowned out the chaos of the Glimmer Market. The simulation is the trigger. I had to get back. I had to stop her. I had to what? Tell a dying woman that her only plan for a dignified exit was a self-destruct mechanism? I had no new solution to offer, only a fresh layer of terror. I shoved my way through the crowd, my heart hammering a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. The vibrant colors and sounds of the market became a nauseating blur. I burst out onto the main thoroughfare, the cold night air doing nothing to clear the static of fear in my head. I hailed an autocab, my voice a strained command as I gave the hospital's address. The ride was a torture of slow motion. The city lights outside the window streaked past, but it felt like we were crawling. Every red light was an eternity. Every pedestrian crossing was a personal affront. I was trapped in a metal box, hurtling toward a catastrophe I now understood but was powerless to prevent. Imagine the feeling of ice flooding your veins, the cold sweat beating on your neck, the sound of your own heartbeat thudding in your ears, louder than the city's noise. That was the race back to Avalon Grace. My mind raced through the possibilities. Could I convince her to abandon the plan? What was the alternative? If she died a natural death, the standard scan would happen, and according to her, that would also summon the hounds to unright her. It was a checkmate. Code 7 was a swift, clean erasure. The scan was a methodical, retroactive one. She had chosen what she saw as the lesser of two evils, and she had chosen me as her instrument. The autocab finally pulled up to the hospital's brightly lit entrance. I threw a stack of credits at the scanner and scrambled out, my legs unsteady beneath me. My eyes immediately scanned the perimeter, and there they were. Parked discreetly in the doctor's lot were two vehicles that stood out not for their flamboyance, but for their utter anonymity. They were large, black, and unmarked, with heavily tinted windows that seemed to swallow the light. Their shape was generic, but their presence was a scream. They were the kind of vehicles you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for them. And now I was. The hounds were here. Silas was right. The mere fact that I was investigating, that I had gone to the glimmer market, that I was asking questions, had I already tripped some silent alarm? Had my digital snooping flagged me? Or was Alara's time simply up? I didn't run. Running would draw attention. I walked, my pace brisk and purposeful, the way a busy doctor moves through a hall. But inside, I was screaming. I pushed through the rotating doors, the familiar scent of antiseptic now smelling like a tomb. I nodded at the night receptionist, my face a mask of calm. I headed for the bank of elevators, my back prickling with the expectation of a hand on my shoulder, a voice calling my name. Just as I reached the elevator bank, the pager on my hip erupted with a shrill, urgent series of beeps, a sound every doctor dreads. I looked down at the small screen. The message was brief, stark, and felt like a physical blow. Code Blue. Terminal Wing. Room 304. Alara. The trap wasn't just baited. It was already springing shut. The race was over. I had lost before I even knew I was running. The doors slid open, and I stepped into the elevator, the descent into the terminal wing feeling like a journey into the heart of a storm that was about to break. The elevator doors opened onto a scene of controlled chaos, but it was the wrong kind. Nurses and a resident I recognized were clustered outside room 304, their faces etched with a specific kind of professional frustration. They weren't battling to save a life. They were being prevented from doing their jobs. Dr. Thorne, thank God. The resident, Dr. Sharma, said, her voice tight. She's conscious. She's refusing all intervention. She pulled her own for. She's just waiting. I pushed through the small crowd and entered the room. The overhead lights were dimmed. Alara lay propped up on her pillows, her breathing shallow and rapid. The heart monitor showed a dangerously erratic rhythm. She had indeed ripped the catheter from her arm, and a small bloom of crimson stained the sheets. But her eyes were clear, serene. The fear I had seen before was gone, replaced by a weary, absolute resolve. The humming of the box on her bedside table was different now. It was weaker, intermittent, like a dying insect. The green glow from within its seams had faded to a dull, flickering ochre. Everyone out, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I'll speak with her. The staff hesitated, then retreated, the doors swishing shut behind them, sealing us in the quiet, dim room. The only sounds were her ragged breath and the pathetic sputter of the box. They're here, Aris, she said, her voice a thin thread of sound. She didn't seem to need an answer. She knew. Alara, the code 7, it's a signal. It will bring them right to you. The words tumbled out, desperate. It's not an escape. It's a trigger. She nodded slowly, as if I'd finally grasped a simple, fundamental truth. Of course it is, she whispered. A clean death is a better message than a captured one. My story ends with me, not with them. I moved to her bedside, my medical training screaming at me to re-establish the four, to administer medication, to do something. But I was frozen by the quiet authority in her dying form. This wasn't a patient in crisis. This was a sovereign relinquishing her throne. What story? I begged, my hand hovering over her frail wrist. What is so important that it requires this? She shifted her gaze from me to the failing box. With a tremendous effort, she lifted a trembling hand and placed it on the dark wood. As her skin made contact, the humming stabilized for a single, steady moment, and the light within flared with a soft, golden pulse. You are a man of science, Aris. You believe a life is a collection of data, a genetic sequence, a series of electrical impulses in the brain. She paused, drawing a painful breath. You are not wrong, but you are not right. A life is a story, and some stories are living things themselves. They have weight. They have a truth that can shape the world around them. The one I carry, it is a seed, a story of what was lost. If they dissect it, if they scan it and break it into data, it will die. Its truth will become just another piece of information to be filed away and forgotten. Her words washed over me, not as a delusion, but as a new and terrifying paradigm. She wasn't carrying information. She was carrying a legacy, a narrative with its own life force. The hounds weren't just data collectors. They were narrative exterminators. My body is just the soil, Aris, she said, her voice growing fainter. The seed must be passed on. It must find new soil. You must not let them skin the soil. You must let it return to the earth, unseen. That is the only way. Her hand fell away from the box, limp. The light within it dimmed significantly, the hum dropping to a nearly inaudible whine. This was her wisdom moment. Not a secret password, not a map to a treasure, but a philosophical bomb that shattered my entire understanding of reality. Life was not data. It was story. And her final act was to be the protector of a story too precious to be digitized and cataloged. In that moment, my flaw, my rigid adherence to the rules of a system that saw lives as charts, shattered. A new purpose, terrifying and immense, crystallized within me. I would not save the patient. I would save the story. The decision was made. It was no longer a choice, but a compulsion. I would honor her wish. Not to help her die, but to help her story live. The moral calculus of my career was now irrelevant against the cosmic scale of her request. I moved to the room's terminal, my fingers flying over the screen. I navigated past the standard menus, into the administrative sublevels. I entered my credentials. The system asked for confirmation. I typed, Protocol 7, Theoretical Airborne Prion Contagion. Source, Patient 304. My thumb hovered over the final enter key. It felt like holding a gun to my own head. Before I could press it, the door to the room hissed open. Not with the gentle swish of a nurse entering, but with a violent, mechanical jerk, as if its motor had been overridden. They filled the doorway. 3 of them. The man from the hall was there, flanked by 2 others. They all wore the same dark, non-reflective suits that seemed to distort the light around them. They carried no visible weapons, only sleek, metallic tablets and a device that looked like a complex, multi-lensed camera. The lead hound, the one I'd seen before, stepped into the room. His eyes, cold and devoid of human emotion, scanned the scene. The dying woman, the flickering box, my hand frozen over the terminal. Step away from the interface, Dr. Thorne, he said. His voice was flat, synthesized sounding, devoid of inflection. It was the voice of a system delivering a message. This is my patient's room. You need to leave, I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. The subject is no longer a patient. She is an asset requiring verification and reclamation, he stated. He didn't look at me as he spoke. His gaze was fixed on Alara. He gestured with his chin, and one of the other hounds raised the camera-like device, pointing it at her face. A low-power laser grid painted itself over her features. Don't, I shouted, moving instinctively to place my body between the scanner and Alara's bed. The lead hound's head swiveled toward me. The movement was unervingly precise. You are obstructing a Class 5 sanitization protocol. Stand aside. You're not scanning her, I said, bracing myself against the bed rail. This is a hospital. There are rules. There are procedures. For the first time, something resembling an expression crossed the man's face. It was a faint flicker of contempt. Dr. Thorne, we are the procedure. The second hound with the scanner took a step forward. I didn't think. I shoved him hard. It was like pushing a statue. He didn't stumble, but the scanner in his hand wavered. The lead hound made a subtle gesture. The third man, who had remained by the door, moved with blinding speed. He wasn't aggressive, merely efficient. He caught my arms, twisted them behind my back, and applied a lock that was painless but utterly immobilizing. I was helpless. "Initiate the scan," the lead hound commanded, his attention returning to Alara. The hound with the device recalibrated it. The laser grid reappeared on Alara's face, focusing on her closed eyelids. A low whine built from the device. This was it. They were going to unwrite her. They were going to reduce her story to a data point and then delete it. I had failed. I struggled against the iron grip holding me, a wave of utter despair crashing over me as the scanner's whine reached its peak. The scanner's whine was a drill boring into my soul. I was a spectator to an execution, my own body a prison. The lead hound watched the process with the detached interest of a technician monitoring a download. Alara, mercifully, seemed unconscious, her chest rising and falling in shallow, fluttering breaths. The box on the table gave one last, weak pulse of light and fell silent, its hum ceasing entirely. The room felt dead without it. In my struggle, my elbow had knocked against the bedside table. The sudden movement, the shock of the impact, was enough. The locked wooden box, now silent and dark, teetered on the edge. For a moment, it seemed to balance. Then it fell. It hit the linoleum floor with a sharp crack that was louder than the scanner's whine. The sound was all wrong. It wasn't the sound of solid wood or delicate electronics shattering. It was the sound of something dry, something organic, splitting open. The lead hound's head snapped toward the sound. His cold composure fractured for a single, revealing instant. "The vessel," he barked, his synthesized voice cracking with something that sounded like alarm. The box had broken along a seam that was never meant to be opened. The two halves lay apart, and from within, no wires, no chips, no data crystal spilled out. Instead, a soft, luminous light, the same golden hue I had seen pulse under Alara's touch, welled up from the broken container. It wasn't a beam or a glare. It was a gentle, living radiance that seemed to pool on the floor, defying the sterile hospital light. In the center of that pool of light lay a single object. It was a seed, about the size of my thumb. But it was like no seed I had ever seen. It was carved from what looked like solidified light, its surface etched with impossibly intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to move if you didn't look at them directly. It pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a sleeping heart. The hounds froze. The scanner was forgotten, its whine dying away. The one holding me loosened his grip infinitesimally, his attention wholly captured by the glowing object on the floor. The lead hound took a step back, his hand going to his ear, muttering rapid, low commands into a comms unit. "Contain it. Non-contact protocol now," he ordered. The seed was not technology. It was not a weapon. It was something else entirely. Something organic and ancient and alive. Alara's words echoed in the silent, glowing room. "The one I carry, it is a seed. A story of what was lost." She hadn't been speaking metaphorically. The story wasn't data in the box. The story was the seed. The room was holding its breath. The lead hound's orders had broken the stillness. The hound who had been operating the scanner now produced a different device from his suit. A crystalline rod that telescoped out, tipped with a complex, claw-like apparatus designed for delicate, non-contact retrieval. He moved toward the seed with the cautious reverence of someone defusing a bomb. "The source is active and uncontained," the lead hound said into his comm, his voice tight. "We are attempting retrieval. The vessel is expended." Expended. The word was a final, cruel epitaph for Alara. My eyes darted to her. Her breathing had all but stopped. She had been the soil, and now the seed had been shed. Her purpose was complete. A profound, grieving anger surged through me, burning away the last of my fear. As the hound extended the claw toward the pulsating seed, a strange thing happened. The seed, of its own volition, rolled. It didn't bounce or skid. It moved with a deliberate, gentle motion, as if pushed by an unfelt breeze, coming to a stop against the toe of my shoe. The hound with the retrieval tool froze, his weapon hovering uselessly in the air. All three of them stared at the seed, then at me. The lead hound's face was a mask of cold fury and something else, confusion. Their protocols, their entire understanding of the asset, had not accounted for this. The source had chosen. "Do not move, Doctor," the lead hound commanded, his weapon now pointed at me. But the choice was no longer theirs. It was no longer even mine. The moment the seed touched my shoe, a jolt, not of electricity, but of pure information, shot up my leg. It wasn't a thought or an image. It was a knowing. A wave of understanding flooded my mind, too vast and complex to comprehend all at once, but leaving behind a clear, indelible impression. I saw flashes of a world that was not our own. A civilization not of steel and data, but of grown, living light and resonant song. I saw a cataclysm, a silent, creeping nothingness that consumed this world of light, not with fire, but with oblivion. And I saw a last, desperate act of preservation, the essence of their story, their memory, their very identity, folded into a single, perfect, living artifact. A seed, meant to be carried to fertile ground. Alara was not the first vessel. She was just the latest in a long, tragic line, passing the seed from one hiding place to the next, across worlds and through time, with the hounds, the agents of that same oblivion, always in pursuit. They weren't just erasing a person. They were trying to exterminate a universe's last memory of itself. I looked down at the seed, then up at the hounds. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. "You can't have it," I said, my voice steady and loud in the quiet room. I bent down. The hound aiming at me tensed, but didn't fire. Their non-contact protocol was a leash they couldn't break. My fingers closed around the seed. It was warm. It was humming, a vibration that resonated not in my ears, but deep within my bones, a silent, comforting song. The light did not burn me. It seeped into my skin, a gentle, welcoming energy. The lead hound's composure shattered completely. "You have contaminated the source. You have no idea what you've done." "I think I do," I replied, clutching the seed in my palm. It felt right. It felt like it belonged there. "You're not here to reclaim an asset. You're here to finish a genocide. And I won't let you." In that moment, I was no longer Dr. Aris Thorne, disgraced physician. I was the next link in the chain. I was the new soil. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that my life as I knew it was over. The sacrifice was not just my career. It was my entire world. The aftermath was a blur of cold efficiency and absolute ruin. The hounds did not arrest me. Their authority operated on a parallel track to conventional law. They simply secured the scene, their silent, intimidating presence ensuring no hospital security intervened. I was escorted not to a police station, but to a stark, windowless office within the hospital's administrative wing. There, I faced a panel consisting of Dr. Evans, a woman from corporate legal whose name I never caught, and a representative from the Health Integrity Board. The seed was gone. One of the hounds had produced a lead-lined case and, with gloved hands, taken it from me. The moment it left my grasp, the humming song in my bones faded, leaving a profound, aching silence. The loss felt physical, a severance from something vital I had only just discovered. The hearing was not an inquiry. It was a foregone conclusion. They had video from the room. They had my unauthorized access logs, my initiation of the Code 7 protocol. Dr. Evans spoke of my bizarre and unprofessional fixation on the patient, my reckless endangerment of hospital safety, and my theft of sensitive biological material. The words psychotic break were heavily implied. My attempts to explain the hounds, the seed, the story, were met with silence or dismissed as the ramblings of a man under extreme stress. The truth was a weapon they used against me. My belief in it was proof of my instability. My medical license was suspended indefinitely. I was terminated from Avalon Grace for gross misconduct and violation of a dozen ethical codes. The story, a sanitized version, was quietly fed to the medical community. Dr. Aris Thorne, the precise man of science, had cracked under pressure. I was a cautionary tale. The personal desolation was absolute. My friends, my colleagues, they all drifted away, unsure of what to believe, wary of the stigma. My life's work, my identity, my reputation, all were systematically dismantled. I was a ghost in my own city, living in a small, sparse apartment, the silence a constant reminder of the song I had lost. The system had not just punished me, it had unwritten me, just as it had tried to unwrite Alara. I was a man who had glimpsed a cosmic truth and had been crushed by the mundane machinery of the world for my trouble. I was a keeper of a story with no one to tell it to, a secret that had cost me everything. Weeks bled into a month. I existed in a state of numb suspension, the world rendered in shades of gray. The memory of the seed's light was the only color left in my mind, a fading dream I clung to. Then, a notification chimed on my personal tablet, a device I rarely used anymore. It was a message from an encrypted, untraceable server. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a single, hyperlinked string of characters and 2 words. Her key. My heart, which had felt like a stone in my chest, gave a single, hard thud. I clicked the link. It didn't open a website. Instead, it triggered a download onto my device. A data packet labeled only Silent Song. It was from Silas. I opened it. There were no documents, no videos. It was a single, complex executable file. When I ran it, it didn't open a window. Instead, it bypassed my operating system and projected a 3-dimensional, rotating model of the seed directly onto my tablet screen. It was a perfect replica, down to the swirling, living patterns on its surface. Text began to scroll beside it, not in any language I knew, but I found I could understand it. The seed itself was the key. This model was a cognitive interface, a bridge it had built in my mind during our brief contact. The text was Alara's legacy. It was not a history book. It was a memory. It revealed that Alara was a vessel, part of a lineage of beings chosen to carry the silent song, the condensed consciousness and memory of the Lumen, a civilization of photic beings from a reality adjacent to our own. They were not aliens in the spaceship sense. They were interdimensional refugees. Their world had been consumed by the quiet, a nullifying force that sought to homogenize existence, to erase all anomalous, complex life. The Hounds were the quiet's agents, a biomechanical pest control unit designed to track and eliminate the contagion of the Lumen's memory. The seed was not a metaphor. It was a literal, bioluminescent archive, a tree of knowledge waiting for the right soil. The sanctuary was not a place on a map, but a state of being, a consciousness capable of understanding and nurturing the story, of allowing it to take root and grow, thus preserving the Lumen from final oblivion. The data packet ended with a set of coordinates, not for a hidden base or a secret lab, but for a location on the edge of the city, a derelict, municipal botanical garden that had been abandoned years ago due to lack of funding. A place of dead soil and forgotten greenery. The Hounds hadn't taken the real seed. They had taken a decoy, a resonant echo the seed had projected at the last second to protect itself. The true seed had transferred its essence to me during that moment of contact. It was sleeping, dormant within my own consciousness, waiting for the right conditions to be planted. Silas's message was not just information. It was a summons. The sanctuary wasn't a location I had to find. It was a state I had to create. The war was not over. I had just been drafted from a doomed defender into its last, best hope. My fall was not an end. It was a planting. The seed's presence in my mind was not a voice or an image. It was a latent awareness, a new layer of consciousness humming just below the surface of my own thoughts. With Silas's data packet as a guide, I learned to interface with it. I wasn't digging for information. I was learning to listen to a song played at a frequency only my soul could hear. The seed, the silent song, of the Lumen, showed me the battlefield. It wasn't a field of trenches and soldiers. It was the world's information network. The quiet, the nullifying force, didn't conquer with armies. It eroded with silence. It infiltrated systems, not to corrupt data, but to subtly edit it, to flatten complex truths into simple, manageable falsehoods, and to ultimately tag profound anomalies, like the memory of an entire civilization, for deletion. The Hounds were its search and destroy algorithm given physical form. Using the seed's cognitive key, I could see the scars. I accessed public databases, historical archives, and scientific journals. I saw where the quiet had been. A groundbreaking theory in quantum biology that was now remembered as a fringe pseudoscience. An archaeological find that suggested a pre-human intelligence, now classified as a hoax. A poet whose work spoke a little too clearly of lost, golden cities, now relegated to obscurity. They weren't erased, just marginalized, made to seem unimportant, untrue. Their story was neutralized. The Lumen were different. Their story was too potent, too alive, to be simply marginalized. It was a narrative seed that, if planted, could grow into a truth that would shatter the quiet's dominion of bland conformity. It had to be actively hunted and exterminated. My new goal was clear. The derelict botanical garden was the place. It was a space of life, however neglected, and most importantly, it was off the grid, a blind spot in the city's hyper-connected surveillance web. It was where the seed could be physically manifested from my mind and planted, creating a stable sanctuary, a beachhead for a story that refused to die. But to get there, I had to move through a city that was, in ways I could now perceive, watched by a silent, predatory intelligence. The journey to the Glimmer Market to meet Silas was a descent into a new kind of paranoia, one based on horrifying fact. Every camera on every street corner felt like a staring eye. Every black sedan was a potential hound. The seed's awareness in my mind was a subtle radar, a tuning fork that vibrated with a low-grade threat alert the entire time. I was a walking anomaly, and the system was designed to detect me. I moved through back alleys and service tunnels, my heart a frantic drum. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the market, which had once felt overwhelming, was now a cloak. I weaved through the crowds, the sense of ozone and spice and decay filling my nostrils. I had to warn Silas. He had given me the key. He deserved to know what was coming. I found him at his stall, the scent of copper a welcome familiarity. He took one look at my face and knew. "It's awaken you," he said, not a question. "They're coming, Silas. They have to know I'm the vessel now." He nodded, his old, tarnished silver eyes scanning the crowd behind me. "The decoy will have bought you time, not a pardon. They will backtrack your digital ghost. They will find my signal to you. They are already hunting." As if summoned by his words, the market's ambient noise shifted. The cheerful din was pierced by a sudden, tense silence rolling from the main entrances. I saw the crowd part, making way for three familiar, dark-suited figures. They moved with that same unnerving, liquid precision. "Go," Silas hissed, shoving a small, crude device into my hand. It was a portable signal scrambler. "The garden. Now, do not look back." I turned and ran, plunging deeper into the market's labyrinthine heart. The pursuit was on. I could hear the commotion behind me, the shouts of vendors as the hounds pushed through without regard. My breath was ragged in my chest, my muscles burning. I was a doctor, not a fugitive. I ducked under a stall selling glowing eels and tanks, scrambled over a pile of discarded shipping containers, and burst out into a narrow, foul-smelling alley. I could hear their footsteps behind me, steady, relentless. They weren't running. They were pacing me, a predator confident in its eventual capture. I used my knowledge of the city, the secret pathways I'd learned from a lifetime of living here. I cut through a condemned parking garage, its ceiling weeping rust-colored water. I slid down a utility ladder into a storm drain, the cold, filthy water soaking my legs. The scrambler in my hand blinked a frantic red. It was actively jamming something. I emerged near the city's edge, the skeletal outline of the old botanical garden visible in the distance across a wide, empty lot. It was so close. I sprinted, my lungs screaming. A black vehicle screeched to a halt, blocking the garden's main gate. Two more hounds emerged. I was cornered. There was no more running. The garden, my sanctuary, was a taunting silhouette just beyond the fence. I had reached the coordinates, but the final door was locked, and the hounds held the key. The seed's presence in my mind was not a voice or an image. It was a latent awareness, a new layer of consciousness humming just below the surface of my own thoughts. With Silas's data packet as a guide, I learned to interface with it. I wasn't digging for information. I was learning to listen to a song played at a frequency only my soul could hear. The seed, this silent song, of the lumen, showed me the battlefield. It wasn't a field of trenches and soldiers. It was the world's information network. The quiet, the nullifying force, didn't conquer with armies. It eroded with silence. It infiltrated systems, not to corrupt data, but to subtly edit it, to flatten complex truths into simple, manageable falsehoods, and to ultimately tag profound anomalies, like the memory of an entire civilization, for deletion. The hounds were its search and destroy algorithm given physical form. Using the seed's cognitive key, I could see the scars. I accessed public databases, historical archives, and scientific journals. I saw where the quiet had been. A groundbreaking theory in quantum biology that was now remembered as a fringe pseudoscience. An archaeological find that suggested a pre-human intelligence, now classified as a hoax. A poet whose work spoke a little too clearly of lost, golden cities, now relegated to obscurity. They weren't erased, just marginalized, made to seem unimportant, untrue. Their story was neutralized. The Lumen were different. Their story was too potent, too alive, to be simply marginalized. It was a narrative seed that, if planted, could grow into a truth that would shatter the quiet's dominion of bland conformity. It had to be actively hunted and exterminated. My new goal was clear. The derelict botanical garden was the place. It was a space of life, however neglected, and most importantly, it was off the grid, a blind spot in the city's hyper-connected surveillance web. It was where the seed could be physically manifested from my mind and planted, creating a stable sanctuary, a beachhead for a story that refused to die. But to get there, I had to move through a city that was, in ways I could now perceive, watched by a silent, predatory intelligence. The journey to the Glimmer Market to meet Silas was a descent into a new kind of paranoia, one based on horrifying fact. Every camera on every street corner felt like a staring eye. Every black sedan was a potential hound. The seed's awareness in my mind was a subtle radar, a tuning fork that vibrated with a low-grade threat alert the entire time. I was a walking anomaly, and the system was designed to detect me. I moved through back alleys and service tunnels, my heart a frantic drum. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the market, which had once felt overwhelming, was now a cloak. I weaved through the crowds, the sense of ozone and spice and decay filling my nostrils. I had to warn Silas. He had given me the key. He deserved to know what was coming. I found him at his stall, the scent of copper a welcome familiarity. He took one look at my face and knew. "It's awaken you," he said, not a question. "They're coming, Silas. They have to know I'm the vessel now." He nodded, his old, tarnished silver eyes scanning the crowd behind me. "The decoy will have bought you time, not a pardon. They will backtrack your digital ghost. They will find my signal to you. They are already hunting." As if summoned by his words, the market's ambient noise shifted. The cheerful din was pierced by a sudden, tense silence rolling from the main entrances. I saw the crowd part, making way for three familiar, dark-suited figures. They moved with that same unnerving, liquid precision. "Go," Silas hissed, shoving a small, crude device into my hand. It was a portable signal scrambler. "The garden. Now, do not look back." I turned and ran, plunging deeper into the market's labyrinthine heart. The pursuit was on. I could hear the commotion behind me, the shouts of vendors as the hounds pushed through without regard. My breath was ragged in my chest, my muscles burning. I was a doctor, not a fugitive. I ducked under a stall selling glowing eels and tanks, scrambled over a pile of discarded shipping containers, and burst out into a narrow, foul-smelling alley. I could hear their footsteps behind me, steady, relentless. They weren't running. They were pacing me, a predator confident in its eventual capture. I used my knowledge of the city, the secret pathways I'd learned from a lifetime of living here. I cut through a condemned parking garage, its ceiling weeping rust-colored water. I slid down a utility ladder into a storm drain, the cold, filthy water soaking my legs. The scrambler in my hand blinked a frantic red. It was actively jamming something. I emerged near the city's edge, the skeletal outline of the old botanical garden visible in the distance across a wide, empty lot. It was so close. I sprinted, my lungs screaming. A black vehicle screeched to a halt, blocking the garden's main gate. Two more hounds emerged. I was cornered. There was no more running. The garden, my sanctuary, was a taunting silhouette just beyond the fence. I had reached the coordinates, but the final door was locked, and the hounds held the key. The hounds closed in from two sides, their movement a synchronized pincer. The empty lot was a perfect killing field. There were no crowds to lose myself in, no alleyways to duck into. The lead hound from the hospital emerged from the vehicle, his expression one of cold, final satisfaction. The game was over. "The anomaly will be contained, Dr. Thorne," his flat voice cut through the still air. "You have served your purpose as a temporary host. The process will be painless." I stood my ground, my back to the chain-link fence of the garden. Despair threatened to swallow me. I had run out of tricks, out of places to hide. I was just a man, and they were something else entirely. My hand closed around the cold links of the fence, the metal biting into my palm. This was it. The end of the line. The story would die with me, unplanted, unremembered. But as my fingers gripped the fence, a strange thing happened. The awareness of the seed in my mind, which had been a passive hum, suddenly flared into a brilliant, silent chord. It wasn't a thought. It was a knowing, an instruction as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. The sanctuary is not a place. It is a state. It is belief made manifest. I looked past the advancing hounds, through the fence, into the derelict garden. It was a graveyard of dead plants and dry earth. But the seed in my mind showed me something else. It showed me the potential. It showed me the memory of life that had been there, the latent energy in the soil, the water in the air. It wasn't about finding the right patch of dirt. It was about becoming the right patch of dirt. The vessel wasn't just a carrier. It was the catalyst. I let go of the fence and turned to face the hounds, my posture changing from one of defeat to one of acceptance. I closed my eyes, shutting out their advancing forms. I stopped thinking of myself as Aris Thorne, the failed doctor. I became a conduit. I focused every ounce of my will, my memory of Alara, my grief for my old life, my hope for this one. I focused it all on the seed sleeping within my consciousness. I wasn't planting it in the ground. I was allowing it to plant me. A wave of energy, warm and vibrant and golden, erupted from my core. It wasn't a physical light, but a wave of pure, resonant information that washed over the lot and through the fence into the garden. It was the story of the lumen, the silent song, finally being sung. The lead hound froze, his hand raised to signal his team. His cold eyes widened, not in fear, but in system-level confusion. His scanners were overloading, reporting impossible data. The world was not changing, but its underlying code was being rewritten. And then, the garden began to change. Where there was cracked, gray earth, a soft, green moss erupted, spreading like a whisper. The skeletal trees flushed with a bark that shimmered with a pearlescent sheen, and their branches sprouted leaves that were not mere leaves, but intricate, glowing patterns of solidified light. The air itself thickened with the scent of ozone after a rain and the perfume of flowers that had never existed on Earth. The derelict garden was transforming into a pocket of another world, a literal patch of lumen reality grafted onto our own. The sanctuary wasn't a location I had to find. It was a reality I had to believe into existence. The seed was the story, and my unconditional acceptance was the soil it needed to take root. The hounds were paralyzed. Their programming had protocols for pursuit, capture, and sanitization. It had no protocol for creation. The lead hound stared at the impossible garden, his face a rigid mask of system conflict. He raised his weapon, a sleek, menacing device, but his aim wavered between me and the shimmering trees. I didn't move to fight. I didn't plead. I simply stood at the center of the unfolding miracle, the bridge between two worlds. I held up my empty hands, not in surrender, but in a gesture of offering. "You can erase the record," I said, my voice calm, carrying a resonance that was not entirely my own. "You can delete the data, but can you kill a story once it has been told? Can you unsing a song that has already been heard?" The hound's finger tightened on the trigger. The logical part of his mind, the core programming of the quiet, demanded my immediate neutralization. I was the source of this catastrophic, reality-warping anomaly. But another part, a deeper, more fundamental layer, was being bombarded with the story. The weapon's targeting sensor was feeding him data not of a hostile target, but of a complex, beautiful, and profoundly living pattern of information. To destroy it was not sanitization, it was sacrilege. I took a step forward, toward the garden, toward the light. You hunt to create silence. But silence is not peace. It is just nothing. She told me that a life is a story. You are trying to burn the library, but the story is already free. I turned my back on him, a gesture of ultimate defiance and ultimate faith. I reached out and touched the fence. Where my fingers made contact, the rusted metal transformed, becoming a lattice of woven, living light. A gateway. I heard the distinct sound of a weapon powering down. I glanced back. The lead hound was lowering his device, his face a battlefield of conflicting commands. The other hounds looked to him, their own weapons drooping. They were soldiers without a war, their purpose rendered obsolete by a truth more powerful than their function. I didn't wait for their systems to resolve the paradox. I stepped through the luminous gateway into the sanctuary. The air hummed with life, with music, with memory. I had not escaped them. I had simply left the world where their rules applied. I had made my stand not with a weapon, but with a word, and the word was the name of a world they could not comprehend, and therefore could not destroy. Inside the sanctuary, the world was remade. The air was warm and carried the scent of blooming light. The ground beneath my feet was soft and resilient, radiating a gentle warmth. The trees, with their luminous leaves, sang a silent, harmonious chord that resonated in my soul. I was no longer just Aris Thorne. I was part of the ecosystem of this story. I turned to face the gateway. The hounds had not followed. They stood at the threshold, a stark line of darkness against the vibrant light. The lead hound stared into the garden, his weapon hanging useless at his side. The cold certainty in his eyes had been replaced by a raw, processing confusion. He was witnessing a fundamental rewrite of the rules he was built to enforce. I stood before them, not as an enemy, but as a custodian. "You are designed to eliminate anomalies," I said, my voice calm, woven into the garden's gentle hum. "But this is no longer an anomaly. It is a new fact. You can stand at the edge and deny it, or you can lower your weapons and witness what you have been trying to destroy." This was the final test, not of strength, but of will. The sower's choice was not just to plant the seed, but to offer its fruit. I was not fighting them. I was inviting them to see. The lead hound took a single, hesitant step forward. His polished shoe touched the transformed soil at the very edge of the gateway. He did not burst into flames or get rejected. He simply stood there, a man at the shore of a new ocean, feeling a wave of impossible data wash over his senses. He looked at his hand, then back at the garden, his programming struggling to categorize an experience that was, for the first time, not a threat, but a gift. The hounds did not enter. They did not lower their weapons. But they did not open fire. After a long, silent moment, the lead hound made a subtle gesture. As one, they retreated, melting back into the city's gloom, their purpose for this target effectively neutralized. They had no protocol for a victory achieved through creation. I was alone in the garden, but I was not lonely. The presence of the lumen was all around me, a chorus of silent stories. The tree that had grown from the seed's first planting was the heart of the sanctuary, its trunk wide and warm, its light-patterned leaves telling the epic of a lost world in a language of pure emotion. Other, smaller shoots were already pushing through the soil, echoes of other stories, other memories that the lumen had carried, now finding their voice in this protected space. This was the payoff. This was what Alara had died for. Not a hidden file or a secret weapon, but a living, breathing archive. A library that could not be burned because it was made of life itself. My career, my old identity, felt like a small price. I had traded a life of preserving bodies for a purpose of preserving souls. The hounds were gone, but I knew the wider war of the quiet against complex life continued. This garden, however, was a beachhead, a declaration that some stories were too resilient to be erased. Time passed differently in the sanctuary. I became its caretaker. The world outside continued, but I existed in a pocket of serene defiance. Silas found his way to me, becoming the garden's first pilgrim. He brought news from the outside, and sometimes he brought others. Not many. A historian who had always felt a truth was missing from the records. An artist whose dreams were filled with light. They would sit beneath the singing trees and leave with a quiet piece, a piece of the story now living within them, ensuring its survival. I was no longer Dr. Aris Thorne. I was the keeper. My purpose was to tend this garden of echoes, to ensure the lumen's song was not just preserved, but heard. The garden grew, slowly, its boundaries subtly shifting, rewriting the derelict lot into a place of impossible beauty. One morning, I found a new object at the edge of the light, just outside the luminous gate. It was a small, carved stone, warm to the touch. When I held it, I felt a fleeting impression, a memory of a vast, silent ocean under a binary star. It was not from the lumen. It was another story, another seed, from a different world, seeking refuge from the quiet. The stone was a message and a hope. We were not the only ones. The garden was not just a memorial. It was becoming a haven. My story ends here, at the gate of a garden that should not exist. I began as a man of science, believing life was a problem to be solved. I learned it is a story to be told. I lost everything I thought defined me, and in that loss, I found a purpose that spans worlds. Aris Thorne chose a story over a system. He traded a life of order for a legacy of mystery, protecting a light that the universe tried to extinguish. The cost was everything he had, but the reward was a truth more valuable than any fact. And so, the final question falls to you now. In a world that often feels increasingly silent, that prizes data over meaning, what are you willing to listen to? What story would you risk everything to protect? Is there a truth you carry that the world tries to quiet? The comments are open. Tell me your story. And subscribe, because some stories are too dangerous and too beautiful to be told just once. The quiet is listening. But now, so are we.